The left is positively melting down for a number of reasons. We've covered a lot of them on the show. But one reason they're melting down is that MSNBC, NBC News broadly, has hired the former head of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, to work there. Oh, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ronna is not, like, beloved by the right. They're not looking at her going, man, I wish she was still the RNC chair. No, a lot of people on the right were like, it's time to go. Thank you. You're a nice person, but not winning elections is kind of a problem. So time to go. And so she gets hired pretty quickly by NBC. And over the weekend, she was on Meet the Press, and the new host of Meet the Press is Kristen Welker. And Chuck Todd was so angry about this. Chuck Todd, the former host of Meet the Press, who was fired from that gig, comes back on to attack his own network now, not for firing him from Meet the Press, but for hiring Ronna McDaniel. Here's how that sounded.
Dive right in. What were your takeaways?
Look, let me deal with the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I think our bosses owe you an apology for putting you in this situation, because I don't know what to believe. She is now a paid contributor by NBC News. I have no idea whether any answer she gave to you was because she didn't want to mess up her contract. She wants us to believe that she was speaking for the RNC when the RNC was paying for her. So she has credibility issues that she still has to deal with.
Yeah.
Is she speaking for herself, or is she speaking on behalf of who's paying her? Once at the RNC, she did say that, hey, I'm speaking for the party. I get that. That's part of the job. So what about here? I will say this. I think your interview did a good job of exposing, I think, many of the contradictions. And look, there's a reason why there's a lot of journalists at NBC News uncomfortable with this, because many of our professional dealings with the RNC over the last 6 years have been met with gaslighting, have been met with character assassination. So it is, that's where you begin here.
Yes, yeah, at NBC, we have such high standards. How can we hire Ronna McDaniel? For more on this, I want to bring in Eddie Scarry now. He's a columnist at the Federalist and the author of Liberal Misery, How the Hateful Left Sucks Joy Out of Everything and Everyone. And boy, do we see that this weekend. Eddie, good afternoon. Great to have you back with us.
Hey, Vince. Good to be here.
Chuck Todd is very upset, Eddie. Why is he so upset?
Oh, God. It's so corny. It's so corny and cringe. And, if I was Kristen Welker, the Kirsten Kristen, doesn't matter. If I was her, and, it's not like I have some high regard for her, I would have looked at Chuck Todd and said, could you please shut up and answer the question? The question she asked him was weigh in on, my interview. He has to go into this white knight thing about how, well, I'm going to defend your honor, and our bosses owe you an apology, but you did a stand-up job. How condescending, how belittling, and just, again, very stupid. And this is what actually journalists in Washington, they think is brave. Because, I actually want to read you this quote that I saw in Political Playbook this morning. I don't know if you saw it. The whole top half of the daily newsletter, their most important newsletter in Political Playbook, was about this whole NBC and Ronna McDaniel thing. And there's a quote, but it's an anonymous person. But the quote was, they're talking about Chuck Todd. The fact that he took it upon himself to not only say this, but frankly, to defend the woman who took his job is pretty remarkable. And then went on to say, he got a lot of attaboys from NBC and MSNBC, including from people who are not prone to give him much credit. I bet he read that and just absolutely glowed, because they're so proud of themselves. And, on Morning Joe on MSNBC, it was another round of, Joe Scarborough saying, she will not be a guest on this program. I can tell you that.
I'll play Joe. Here's Joe this morning so people can hear that. Here it is.
We've been inundated with calls this weekend, as have most people connected with this network, about NBC's decision to hire her. We learned about the hiring when we read about it in the press on Friday. We weren't asked our opinion of the hiring, but if we were, we would have strongly objected to it.
And Mrs. Joe had thoughts, too.
To be clear, we believe NBC News should seek out conservative Republican voices to provide balance in their election coverage. But it should be conservative Republicans, not a person who used her position of power to be an anti-democracy election denier. And we hope NBC will reconsider its decision. It goes without saying that she will not be a guest on Morning Joe in her capacity as a paid contributor.
What is even happening? So they've spent the last 24 hours attacking their own network for hiring Ronna McDaniel. Ronna McDaniel's not some flame-throwing right-winger. She's just, she's like an establishment person.
And you're right. She ran the committee. She ran the RNC. She did the job, which I think she did. I mean, I think you said it very well at the top of this segment. It was a curious hire only to me in the sense of what are they getting out of it. She ran an operation. She was a pretty unremarkable person, other than her attacking her own family member and changing her last name to have little association with Mitt Romney. That was kind of funny. But otherwise, I mean, the Trump people don't really care for her. The anti-Trump people don't really care for her. So I don't know what the in is. I mean, it's a $300,000 a year, reportedly a $300,000 a year salary.
Wow.
But then otherwise, I would say that what's kind of funny about this whole thing, it tells you how little NBC executives think of Joe Scarborough, think of Mika Brzezinski, think of Chuck Todd, that they didn't ask them, and they don't care that they're complaining and moaning and crying on air. They don't care. I mean, it won't surprise me if there is some kind of, well, actually, we made a mistake and blah, 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 because now there's so many of them retching about it. But I think that from the beginning, it was just like, they should understand. They don't care what their opinion is.
I'm sorry, but let's bring up some of the other comparisons. So Ronna McDaniel hired. Okay, fine. They've hired Jen Psaki straight out of the White House. She was the White House press secretary. Boom. She lied to the American people in that capacity. She gets a television show on MSNBC. There's no wailing of gnashing of teeth going on about hiring Jen Psaki. They hired John Brennan, the former CIA director, after he lied about spying on the United States Senate. Lying has been a feature of his career. There was no complaining whatsoever. In fact, they turned to him as the burning bush on all intel community stories. John Brennan, MSNBC contributor. They have an entire show dedicated to Nicole Wallace. She's a former Bush White House spokeswoman who has decided that her entire life is defined by how much she hates Trump, and she spends every day telling us that. She's working out her emotional problems on the air. Fine. But they never once paused and were like, oh, my gosh. Right from telling us that the Iraq war is justified or whatever stuff she said, when she was a Bush person. Now she gets an MSNBC job and it's all totally fine. What?
Oh, right. And I'm so glad you brought the Nicole Wallace one, because that really is the major one. Nicole Wallace, it's not, Jen Psaki, just terrible all around, bad at her job, a demonstrable liar, explicitly dumb. They don't care about that. But Nicole Wallace, that's somebody who she defended Bush and Dick Cheney. That's how, so long as you will shed any amount of dignity you have to suck up to these people, that's what matters. If Ronna McDaniel came out, just guns blazing, I hate Trump, put him in jail, take him for every penny he has, liquidate all his assets, she would be the star, the absolute star. They would make her head of NBC, MSNBC. She'd have 3 different programs.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they have like Peter Strzok on their air, like a guy who spends all of his time attacking Trump supporters. You can smell them in a Walmart, he said, and then they're like happy to have him on the air. It's actually so crazy that they're freaking out about this. I do want to turn to what Ronna McDaniel actually said on Meet the Press, which I thought was interesting for a number of reasons. Let me see here. I'll play. This is Ronna saying that she was forced out by Trump. Now, remember, Trump picked Ronna McDaniel. She was there by the grace of Trump in the first place. In the end, she was sent away as he became the nominee. Here's what she said.
Let's dive right into this and start with your decision to step down as RNC chair. If you can, take me behind the scenes a little bit. Were you pushed out of your role?
Well, there's no question that as RNC chair, you have to remain neutral. And we had a primary process. And so we did have debates, right? We had debates and there was tension and a little friction that started during that process. It was well played out in the media. And I knew at that point when I was doing that role and we were going to have debates that when the nominee came forward and it was likely to be President Trump, that they would want to switch. And that's his right as nominee.
And so were you pushed out by him?
He absolutely wanted me to move aside and wanted Michael Whatley and Lara Trump to come in.
Now, they're turning this into a scandal on NBC, but it is actually pretty customary, for the nominee to get a say-so on who runs the party. That's on both the right and the left.
Right, and I mean, I guess to the extent that it's newsworthy in any sense, it is that Trump up until recently was very much a Ronna McDaniel supporter.
Yeah,
he was like absolutely. He pushed her for when there was, you know, I don't think she was under any real threat when it was Hamid. I can't remember the one.
Harmeet
The
Dillon.
Tucker back. Yeah, when she was the one who was vying for the spot, and Tucker got behind her, and there was actually a pretty solid grassroots push to get her in, and Ronna McDaniel had locked it up pretty handily, especially with the support of Trump. I mean, that's kind of interesting. I will say that she was. It was a little bit surprising how forthcoming she was about that whole thing. But I think that that's what they should want. That's what a news operation should want. You know what we want: transparency. You want the full story. The one part that I listened to her and thought that's pretty weak was when, you know, she kept Kirsten Welker or whatever, she kept pressing her on, you said that the election wasn't fair, 2020 election wasn't fair. Are you saying that President Biden didn't win fair? And they played a clip of her back when she said he did not win fair. Okay, well, she's acknowledging he won. She just doesn't think it was fair.
Right.
I don't think that's a controversial position to take. You know, Hillary Clinton to this day says that 2016 was not on the level. Those are her words. You know, you can say that, and that's a perfectly fine thing to say, so long as you acknowledge what the actual reality is. And she kind of waffled on that, which I thought was pretty weak, and I lost some of the respect that I have for Ronna McDaniel. A little bit of it wrote it. But otherwise, I think that, it was a perfectly fine interview. She sat there for 20 minutes, and all these people just won't shut up about it.
I know. Well, the whole, like, the election thing, the way people ask questions about the election too, MSNBC, NBC News, whatever you call them now, they draw false battle lines about how to think about the election. People have complex views about the election, including all of the meddlesome involvement that figures on the left had. Everything from the Zucker bucks to the hiding of the Hunter Biden laptop story to Facebook's involvement, Twitter's involvement, the FBI's involvement. If the way we actually conducted the election, the ballots, the drop boxes, the changing of election laws, places like Pennsylvania, if you don't pause for a moment and you're like, man, that wasn't a good way to run an election, then you're an idiot. You're an idiot. There's no question.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
In other words, like, you have every right to be uncomfortable with the 2020 election. In fact, that's the logical conclusion. Here we go. One more for you. This is Ronna McDaniel being asked about Trump's plan to pardon January 6 defendants. Now, once again, listen to the dishonesty in the way that Kristen Welker asks the question. Just kind of the exchange that the two of them have. I think it's interesting.
Do you disagree with Trump saying he's going to free those who've been charged?
I do not think people who committed violent acts on January 6th should be freed.
So you disagree with that? He's been saying that for months. Ronna, why not speak out earlier? Why just speak out about that now?
When you're the RNC chair, you kind of take one for the whole team, right? Now I get to be a little bit more myself, right? This is what I believe. I don't think violence should be in our political discourse, Republican or Democrat. And I disagree with that.
All right, there's a couple things to unpack here, but what jumps off the page here for you, Eddie?
Well, okay, so was Welker asking her, do you agree with the decision to pardon, or was it, are you okay with January 6th? I couldn't even quite catch it.
My impression, the way Kristen Welker set this up, was to suggest that Donald Trump has endorsed releasing violent defendants from January 6th. Now, I have been tracking the Trump saga on this particular question, and Trump has offered qualified pardon offers throughout. In other words, if you weren't, punching cops in the face and breaking windows, then you're a great candidate for a pardon from Donald Trump. He's never once been like, hey, the violent guys, they're all getting pardons. That's never been something he's said or even suggested. And meanwhile, Kristen Welker's pretending that that's the case and then trying to stick Ronna McDaniel there with it. And then Ronna McDaniel kind of almost like cowardly in a cowardly way is like, well, I couldn't tell the truth before, but I'll tell the truth now, which is nobody who committed violence should get a pardon. I'm like, what?
Well, right, and then
this?
there's only one acceptable answer when you're talking with journalists as far as getting them to shut the hell up about January 6th. Is it was an armed racist insurrection,
right.
And yes, they should all go to prison, and Donald Trump should never get to run again. That is the only answer they will accept. And for anybody who answers anything to do with January 6th and doesn't say, let's talk about 2020. Let's talk about the hostage situation that the left, that the Democratic Party, the rioting that they excused, they instigated, that they were okay with. Suddenly now there's a riot they find defensive on the one day that was actually, if you're going to talk about fiery but mostly peaceful, that was January 6th. And I think that they were lucky it wasn't a little bit worse and some people might say it could have been a lot worse. And that might have been okay with them. But I think that, if you're going to talk about January 6th, I don't even want to begin the discussion and act like that was the day history started without talking about 2020.
If it was worse, they wouldn't have to make up details about it. If it was worse, they could just point to things that actually happened. But the truth is not enough for them, so they lie. Thank you, Eddie Scarry, as always, for your thoughts on all of this. Really appreciate your time today.